The great thing about engineering is that engineers are all kinds of people. And, I think the thing that's most common to all engineers is just that they solve problems.
It's not just about a business problem, a technical problem, a processes problem. It's about coming up with creative ways to solve these problems.
One of the great skills of engineers, we're just curious. We just want to learn, ask questions, and take measures to really take action.
The path isn't always direct. Sometimes it needs a substitution. But in the end, you have to solve the problem and use creativity a lot to get there.
I always describe it a little bit like the Madonna of careers. You just keep recreating yourself throughout your own career. You can be whatever you want to be ultimately.
Hello, my name is Dusty Rhodes and you're welcome to our Engineers Journal Amplified podcast. This is the first in a three-part special on digitalisation in engineering, where experts at the forefront of their engineering fields will explore how digitalisation has been woven into the fabric of business and society and how Irish engineers are rising to the challenge. Today, we have three amazing guests for you. Jeffrey Roe is Telclic Head of Engineering, who has gained a wealth of experience in building public transport systems, from bike share schemes to parking and port traffic access management systems. Suzanne Roe is an engineer and Managing Director of Triskele Consulting, who helps startup companies navigate the technical and regulatory requirements for new medical devices. And finally, we have Veronica Mariti Sesoko, who is working with Accenture, the dock, as an Operations Senior Analyst, but previously worked as an engineer in the Smart City team at Dublin City Council. And it's some of her experience there she'll be sharing with us. You're all very welcome to the podcast. Before we dig down into some specific projects, which I know you're going to talk about, can I ask each of you to give us just a bit of an overview of how technology plays a part in your day-to-day work? We'll start with Jeffrey.
I guess digitalisation has allowed us to bring a lot of admin staff, and we're able to bring those kind of efficiencies by leveraging different technologies around digitalisation and enable those companies to scale in a way that it wouldn't be just possible if they're doing it all by hand or having people do all the data entry and the processes.
Suzanne, you're in the medical field. How has digitisation shaped patient experiences over the last 20 years?
So, I think it's really interesting because when I think of digitization, a lot of the time I immediately go, oh, it doesn't really apply to medical devices. But, when I was thinking back on my own career, I spent quite a number of years working with active implantable devices. So those are devices like your pacemakers, your cardiac defibrillators, and your heart failure devices. All of those devices inherently work with embedded firmware and software to control how they listen to the heart and how they respond with therapy. But a huge impact with that technology that's been around for so long actually is remote monitoring, where a lot of these patients would have what used to be a bedside monitor that wirelessly would pick up information from the device. So if they'd had, for instance, some kind of a heart arrhythmia and the device had to kick in and treat it, that could get uploaded to their doctor's clinic and the doctor could actually review that event remotely. And, particularly with heart failure patients, their weight sometimes will go up and down because, they have an increase in fluid in the body if their heart is not working. And again, with remote monitoring, it stops patients having to potentially travel a really long distance to go to a clinic for, what could be fairly routine treatment or modification of medication for those patients. And the other hidden benefit is it gives patients a sense of reassurance, that there's something watching. So, kind of that's my first experience of it. But, today when you look at how digitization is affecting, devices, you can see it, from the Fitbits that we wear on our wrists, Apple Watches. Now, not all aspects of those wearables are considered medical devices, but certainly the AFib app that's on those is FDA approved and is CE marked as a medical device. And, then other things like patient tracking in hospitals. Hopefully we'll all have electronic patient files that when you travel, your information can travel much more easily with you. So if you're on holidays, your treating doctor potentially on holidays can access your files from far away.
Just on that point, Suzanne, I was going to ask, is this digitization really kind of getting that joined up approach to people's medical records?
So I think the technology is well and truly there. There's no doubt about that part. But there are challenges around things like GDPR, information crossing geographic boundaries, and some of the legislation that's there to protect people's health privacy. And some of that can slow things down. So there is still a lot of work, I think, to match up what is technically capable with, what we can do within the realms of protecting people's privacy, but also making sure that they can get healthcare at the point that they need it much more quickly and more efficiently.
Veronica, your area is in planning for cities. Now, that's a fairly big thing to get into your head. How has digitization changed the way we approach city planning?
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting because where I work is innovation. So it's smart cities. It's really how we can use that digitalization and many different tools and technologies that are coming up to actually improve our city, how we can run more efficiently, how we can better engage with our citizens, how we can also make better decision making based on data and being transparent with people. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about digital twins, and basically it's how we can start populating and visualizing the city or the proposed new city within the context, and overlaying loads of different data sets, being able to visualize in a more friendly way, so using 3D models, and then how we can engage and explain all those visualizations to people in a way that they can interact with the model. So we are adding transparency. We are being able to do that in web browsers, so people can just go to our website, interact, give us some feedback. We can capture all of those, analyze this feedback, and then based on those, make our decisions. And always like comfort of your home, being very like two ways kind of like channel to engage with our citizens. So I think it's a win-win for everyone.
Now, you're all working in vastly different sectors of engineering, and it's clear to see that digital systems do help speed, they do help efficiency and accuracy. But let's start getting into some specific projects that you've been working with. Jeffrey, I'd like to start with yourself. You've worked on a big project around traffic flow, which you did in Senegal. Can you give us an overview of that project?
Yeah, so it's based down in Dakar, the capital city of Senegal, which kind of acts like a gateway for the neighbouring countries. It's a very busy port. So before we got involved, it was all a bit of an archaic paper system. Trucks would line up, queue for days to get access to the port. There wasn't much efficiency or throughput. And so we got involved to really bring it a level of digitalization and business processes to the project. So it involved in putting in lots of equipment like cameras, barriers, holding areas in the port itself, and then 100 kilometers away from the port. So we could manage and better give people reliability and set expectations that if you have a booking to go and collect a shipment from the port, that you would be there at 3 o'clock and there would be space and traffic available. So we saw some great successes in terms of the throughput of trucks, and then the reliability in terms of people having that guaranteed visit time, and that kind of reassurance to a lot of the transport and logistics companies, and enabled the port authority to really increase the amount of boats and shipping that they have into their port. And we could really do that because of the digitalization, and because we're a remote team here in Ireland, and we only have a small team on the ground. We leverage a lot of that kind of digital technologies that allowed our engineers to remotely monitor the equipment, set up all the processes, video calling, all the kind of tools that we're used to, and allowed us to do a project that's so far away.
When you first came to the project, how paper-based was it? Was it entirely paper-based, or had they dipped their toe in digitization at all?
it was entirely paper based. You had to go to one office, get a piece of paper, then go to the customs office, get another piece of paper for a different time, and then you would be given an approximate time based on when the ship would arrive, maybe in 2 or 3 days, depending on weather. It had no systems in place to deal with weather, traffic flow, the rate that you would unload ships. There was all these variables, so they couldn't give you an accurate time, or they couldn't even let you know that the ship was delayed in a meaningful way. So we brought those systems in place, like driver app, alerts, where we monitor the traffic flow on a street, and we can tell, we model that this street is able to take 50 trucks an hour, and if we notice it's reaching capacity, we have algorithms to automatically alert people that their time for collection will be slightly in the future. So we brought all those kind of smarts and those tools in place to pretty much transform an archaic system of paper from multiple people to an all online digital system where you have the tools, the statistics, where people can make predictions, they can make plans for future growth and capacity building.
Now, people don't like change. And when you have people who are used to dealing with paper and, it's the way it is, what can I do? There's a 3-day delay. And all of a sudden everything is efficient and they have to do stuff on smartphones and apps. They can actually be quite hesitant about getting involved. What was the reaction of people at the port in Senegal?
So we're dealing with lots of different stakeholders. For example, the truck drivers, there was no place for them to queue. Although there was some upset about switching to a digital system, but then when we told them, you can park in this lovely holding area, we'll put in facilities like toilets, restaurants, a prayer room. So all these extra facilities that you can use while you wait was the kind of the carrot that we got them to come on board. And then the local community were really happy about the project because of the air quality. Like, we went from idling trucks in the street, with problems with air quality, to being trucks nicely parked in a car park. There's no hanging around. There's no engines running. So I think all the stakeholders were happy with the project, but it came a lot down to education, finding local champions. We were very much concerned about us being an outside Irish company coming in. We found local champions, local leaders to help us get the message across that it's a win-win for everybody if we help you adopt to this digitalized system.
What was the biggest challenge on that project that was wrecking your head that you had to fix?
I guess the biggest challenge would be, it's definitely the language barrier and dealing with the level of education. You have lots of local tribal languages, and of course we couldn't translate into every language. So it's about commuting and making the processes simple and streamlined. For example, your first language is, majority of people down there, the first language is French, but a lot of the truck drivers, the first language isn't French, or if they're coming from Mali or something, they might speak a more local dialect. The big challenge was making the system simple enough that anyone with basic language skills in the languages that we could provide, that they could understand it and process through the process.
So you were kind of simplifying everything as much as possible. Were you using iconography as well, so that you would be communicating through pictures for what people had to do?
Exactly. So a lot of it was pictures, signage at all the ports, having enough training and onboarding processes. So we decided that we wouldn't do like a big bang switchover. It would be a gradual process. We wouldn't just, leave everybody out to dry or feel that they're left in a void or missing out on the change in systems. It was much a gentle process to bring everyone along with us, because these people have been driving, or the drivers, for their whole careers. We didn't want to just end their career and make them, irrelevant anymore. We wanted to bring them all with us. So it was a lot of local education, local meetings, and to get people on board the new system.
Now, it sounds amazing that, you're based in Ireland, the project is based in Senegal. How did that work? Were you doing a lot of remote working, were you?
Well, we found a great local partner down there. The majority of the software and systems would be designed here in Dublin, and then we had two staff based down there, and during the initial construction of the project, so installing all the equipment, setting up the cameras, the servers, that sort of stuff. A lot of that we would send down engineers for about a 5 to 6 week period, but a lot of it can be managed remotely. And one of the big challenges that we kind of have to overcome because of this distance is we have to remember that in that city we have a unreliable power grid and an unreliable internet connection. So we had to build a lot of fault tolerances into the system that it would still work without internet, that there would be local copies, and when the internet would return, we'd have this cross syncing system where information that would be just stored locally would then be synced into the cloud. So we had all that processes, that extra resilience that we built into the system for this reason, because we were so remote.
Veronica, let me ask you about a project you were involved in, and this is the Digital Twin program, which is being developed by Dublin City Council. What is the program?
Yes, so it's very nice to hear from Jeffrey, because we have a lot of crossovers as well. So pretty much in Dublin City Council, we are developing a digital twin program, and that's composed by 5 pillars. And one of them is actually looking at climate change and sustainability, and it's pretty much how we can replicate what is happening in the city, collecting all those data about traffic, about air quality, and how we can visualize all of those in the same layer. We can include the 3D model of the city, and then we can start doing like studies to better understand how things work. And then after, when we can explain easier to people how those things correlate and you can prove those, we can also start like running simulations and a little bit of those predictions that Jeffrey was like talking about. We had another 4 pillars. So one of them is about emergency service. So we were doing with Dublin Fire Brigade, and that one was really looking at building 3D models of high-risk buildings in relation to fire, and how we could overlay loads of information about what are the hydrant locations, the alarm panel, all the hydrants, all the contact points. So in case of a fire, they have all those pre-instant plans already, and on the way they can go studying. So it can save time for them, especially because they are not their day-to-day in that building. So they also told me, oh, it's very hard because we don't know the building and it's full of smokes, so you actually don't know where you're getting. So they could do surveys internally as well and start doing like routescapes and tagging pictures of like areas that could be a very high risk for them, or areas that could be prioritized, for example. The third pillar that we're doing is a little bit more like soft, light touch. It's about tourism and economy. So we're building augmented reality or AR applications to try to do like storytelling. So we're building for Docklands area, a heritage trail, so tourists can come and point, see how it looked like years ago, and then it has a full narrative. So just get to talk a little bit about our heritage and how it was before, and you can just visualize how it's now at the same time. The fourth one, it's really looking at that first part that I was talking on the planning side of the city. So how we can start building 3D models of the city. When we have new proposed buildings, we could insert those that the architects and developers are already building in 3D. And then we see all of those in context. And then we can engage better with our citizens in an interactive way using a web browser platform, so people can just go play, have a look, loads of questions that they have. It's about, oh, but how tall that's going to be? Is that going to be covering shadows on my apartment or where I live? So you can start seeing all of those just in an interactive way and on the comfort of your house. And because it's interactive, they can also give us like much better feedback. And then we can go back and do all the study analysis. And then the last one, it's a partnership between Smart Dublin and DCU campus, and we're using their expertise of the researchers to be looking more at a campus level, how people move around. Are the rooms being booked, and maybe there is nobody inside those buildings, but the lights are on. So how you can be like better managing all the estates and facilities, and maybe start doing like some cost savings as well. So there is all those perspectives.
That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. I'm fascinated by what you say about having a 3D model of Dublin City. Because having a 3D model for now, I mean, we've seen some examples with Google Maps. That's amazing. But you're talking about also being able to project what the 3D model would look like in the future. That's just mind-blowing. Yeah. How did you go about building that 3D model? Because that's an enormous job.
Yeah, so those are actually some of the questions that we have, because building 3D models of a very big area of the city, it's very costly, and not just costly to acquire the data, but also to process, to build, to host the 3D model. So that's part of the program, and the way that we are doing it's pretty much an exploring phase. So we are engaging with 3 different companies. They have different business models. They have different techniques as well to do collection of the data. And what we are doing is really reviewing for each of the use case. So what's the level of detail we want? Do we want to look more the Google Maps Street View? Do we want to look more like a block model? And then we are kind of like getting to a conclusion that for different use cases, we need different models. And then one of the reasons is, so the block model, you can make it even more realistic. So if you want to do better engagement with the people about using virtual reality so they can be immersive in the space, that's the best one because it's more comfortable to be looking. On the other hand, sometimes people just want to very easily just recognize. It doesn't need to be like very high quality and comfort level, because you're not going to spend that much time looking at the buildings. So then maybe the other model that is called reality mesh, it looks a little bit more at Google Maps. But to be like higher quality, you would need to fly closer and capture too many pictures. So we are also like asking those questions. So how close, how many pictures, how do we do that? How often do we need to be capturing this data to keep updated? So parts of the projects are to answer those.
And you're using drones to get that imagery, are you?
Yeah, so for the Dublin Fire Brigade, that use case I was mentioning, that's what they are doing. So that was one of the discoveries. If we have specific buildings, it's very cost efficient and it gives us a very good quality model and comfort levels if we do a drone survey, because then they can just close the area, fly the drone very close to the building, capture loads of pictures, and it's still like fine for them. But when we're talking about a city scale, it's quite hard to do it in a super high quality. So we are kind of trying to see, do we need all of those? And I think the answer that we are finding is we just need a mix. We don't need every single building in high quality, but just something that is recognizable. People are familiar. They know they can locate themselves. And maybe for the specific ones that we want more details or that we're going to be working on, then we just go fly, collect the data, and have a more detailed one.
But Dublin is a huge place to cover. What was the main challenge of scaling up with those drones to cover the city?
Yeah, so at the start of the project, we were actually not using drones. The way that we were building the models were flying airplanes. So we could capture the data and they could easily fly like few hours, cover the entire city, and still give us like a good kind of like model. And that's kind of like what I was mentioning. It's about mixing those different levels of detail. So maybe we can just have those airplane photographies done, and it gives us like good context. And then for like the developing areas that we're doing, the big blocks of like Pullbag or any STZ area, then we could just go and start like doing the surveys with the drones. For the fire brigades, they also have like priority of buildings. They don't need every single building, but if they are like big employers or like have like chemical plants or something like that. So we can start doing the surveys in very detailed level.
Suzanne, let's move on to the medical end of things. How would you describe on a scale of 1 to 10, say, the rollout or the change to digitization during COVID?
Certainly from my experience, because I'd be working with novel technologies and brand new devices, one area that was really adversely impacted by COVID was our ability to progress clinical studies for a couple of different reasons. Theatres were shut down because all of the elective type of surgery initially was closed off, and obviously the priority was to keep hospital beds available for COVID patients. But as understanding of the disease progressed, elective surgeries came back on board. But of course, then we had travel bans, so we were not physically able to travel. And usually with a brand new device, you would have somebody in the organization standing behind the implanting physician to be available to answer questions, to provide support in person, and very much, that face-to-face interaction, getting live feedback on the device is very important. In addition to that, we'd be collecting user experience data. We're observing how they use the device. Are they doing something differently than what we expect them to do with it? So we couldn't do any of that anymore. So one area that really came into play was how digitization really actually supported us being able to get back up and running. And, all of a sudden we had cameras in theatres, and that sometimes was just somebody's mobile phone, where you would have one of the clinical research assistants or a nurse holding up a mobile phone so we could physically observe what was going on in a live surgery. You could see what was actually happening in real time as an implant was going on, and be able to collect the data that we needed, because ultimately, if you applied to do a clinical study, you're supposed to have it done within a certain time frame, or you're limited to a certain number of patients. So all of these studies stopping is really unhelpful in terms of getting new products to the market. So it was just, I suppose, it wasn't conscious use of the technology, but it was certainly the availability of it meant that things could progress, and it just became a solution out of the box that we didn't have to think of before. But it was really useful to see how we use that.
So new devices and getting them out there and improving medicine overall is your area. And you've mentioned kind of devices in general. Are you able to give me an example of like a widespread medical device that is used by patients, which have come about through digitization?
So I think, if really not necessarily a specific device used by patients, but if you think about it a bit differently, there's been a huge increase in artificial intelligence implemented and now starting to get approved, particularly through FDA, for doing analysis on scans. So there's been a lot of breakthroughs in being able to have machine learning looking at images taken of potential cancerous lesions, etc., and where the machine is able to actually learn and feedback whether or not it looks like it could be a cancerous tumor. And there's huge challenges in that area, because the accuracy of the algorithms to make those decisions, and ultimately, a clinician is looking at that scan, but it's which ones to look at and being able to increase throughput but maintain the same level of clinical care. So, for regulators, there's a huge amount of pressure there, because the speed of technology is nearly outpacing, the time frame by which you need to be able to generate the data to prove that technology is trustable. You've got people's lives effectively in the hands of this software. So software as a medical device, and all of the capability that engineers bring to that in software coding, etc., and then taking that to the regulatory environment and putting it through risk analysis and all of the types of testing and simulations to make sure that works repeatedly and accurately and reliably is really quite challenging. But I think that's really, it's a space where a lot of new companies are working in. And I think the interaction with the regulators to nearly keep pace of regulation going in tandem with the technology is really important. And certainly you see, the regulators are coming to the table with that, which is really positive.
I was about to say, do you find the regulators are a little slow to move, or does it seem to work out okay in your end of the world?
Certainly my experience of it would be, I think anybody who works in medical technology and indeed pharma as well, when you hear you've got an FDA audit or a TGA auditor coming to inspect your facility and your devices, it usually put a few chills through the body, and there's a lot of focus on getting ready, and there's a lot of panic. But the experience on that end, which is checking for compliance, it's very, very different in new products. And there are great opportunities to actually go and talk up front to regulators, be it FDA or be it the competent authority in Ireland. And also, there's new pathways being set up through the European Commission, but there's free forms where basically you can write a proposal, tell them about, here's what we're trying to develop, here's what we think it's going to be, and propose how you're going to test it, and do an awful lot of that conversation up front with them, whereby you're sitting in the room effectively with expertise, and it's cross-functional expertise. So you'll have medical professionals present, usability, human factors expertise, preclinical animal testing expertise. Sterilization is a big part as well, if it's an implantable device. And there's a great opportunity to interact with them and get feedback on, what are they going to look for in terms of the type of testing, or if, you need to do a clinical study. And they certainly won't tell you the answer. They don't tell you what you need to do, but they will provide a lot of guidance about the gaps that they think that maybe your proposal is missing, things that maybe you haven't thought about. And it's always great to get the medical professional input, when you're talking about something that's brand new, that there's nothing similar out there. So yeah, it's great. It's really exciting. And they're actually really collaborative at that stage.
Looking back over, say, the last 5 years, Suzanne, what's the one problem that has been solved for you by digitization?
I think, it's probably more of the solutions that Jeffrey and Veronica have already been talking about. So I think certainly from a manufacturing of medical technology perspective, the move away from paper-based records happened quite a long time ago. There's very few organizations now which would use paper-based processes. All of the documentation, the records, setting up traceability for how devices are built, instructions for how devices are built, the training that's required, all of that is digitized. And, it is much easier to access records. It's much easier to, if you need to do an investigation on something, to be able to pull all that information from wherever it is you are in the world. And certainly if you're working in a multinational organization, everybody who is located basically worldwide is able to access all of the same information at the same time, which is fantastic. And the other thing I think that lends itself to then as well is that, you really do have companies that are working 24 hours because there's always somebody awake. And there's always somebody pulling a record or working on a test report or working on testing, no matter where you are in the world. So you finish up your day, and by the time you're getting back to your inbox in the morning, you're getting updates on, maybe a clinical study or some new device testing, or so it's very, very accessible. And I think the sharing of information and the speed and efficiency at which information is shared in that way really helps us progress things. We do see a lot now, certainly Ireland would be, is a huge success story. It's a global centre for medical device and medical technology manufacturing, and has been for many years. And, certainly I think, the industry is at the forefront of implementation of things like, Industry 4.0, being able to basically, stand at a board and see exactly where devices are, and exactly, are things being built as they should be, or, your yields as they should be, or you have more failures in manufacturing than you should be, etc. So it's much more visual, it's much more accessible. And that's fantastic. And I think that's what we want to see, that level of visibility and accessibility of information. It would be fantastic to see that move into the clinical area, for patient records and access to doctors, etc.
So we've been listening to each other and all the various projects that we've been involved in. What question would you like to ask one of the other guys on the panel? Let's start with Veronica.
Yeah, well, because my background is in transportation, so transport engineer. I find really fascinating about Jeff projects. So you mentioned all the language barrier. Do you think with the new technology, that they do real-time translation, are we gonna get to that point that maybe you can have the chatbots and just translating real time and answering all the queries that people might gonna have, maybe as part of the solution? I don't know as well what's the cost for building this kind of solution, but maybe that's something in the future that could help. I don't know your views.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. We have been piloting WhatsApp bots, and we've had some great feedback because WhatsApp is it's very widespread in Senegal at the moment. So we have been testing out WhatsApp bots for customer queries and checking account numbers, that sort of stuff. And in that, I certainly we could build in some more real-time translation into the local languages. But the problem is that these local dialects, unfortunately, big tech have left them behind. They're not making translation systems for Wolfie or another local tribal dialect. They're just not, unfortunately, not interested in such a small community. So unfortunately, I don't think we'll get to the stage where we can do some real-time translation services unless these big tech companies come out and democratize their technology and enable it for kind of minority languages.
Suzanne, what about yourself? What question would you like to ask Jeffrey or Veronica?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting listening to, all of that management around the port, and all of those pieces of paper flying everywhere. And ultimately, when you boil it all down, it's about moving things more efficiently. And, I wonder, it just sounds like such a transferable type of technology, that if, we were ultimately able to, have patients maybe with trackers or even hospital trolleys traveling to an operating theatre, for instance, that you would be able to see, if there was a delay and not to move somebody, or, freeing up time so that you could have more efficiency and more throughput going through, what sometimes are limited resources, particularly things like CT scanners and MRI scanners, there's limited resources for those, and to be able to maximize our efficiency and get more people through, would be fantastic. And it seems to me that that type of technology has to be transferable. But I'd pose that one to Jeffrey and see what he can do.
Well, the technology is very transferable because we got our start originally operating a public bike sharing scheme in Cork, Galway, Limerick and Waterford for the NTA. So if you just think of bikes, translate them to trucks, there's lots of them moving from all these bike stations around. So we used a lot of our learning from managing and running those logistics about having a shared resource, having predictions of capacity. And then we brought that to the port operations field, and it was just about embedding new types of technology. So instead of RFID scanners and bike locks, we're moving to cameras to count trucks and read number plates. So it is quite interesting how the technology, how we started off in public bike sharing schemes, then into port operations, and now we're bringing some of that technology into some software we're developing for a national railway. So it's interesting how bikes and trucks and now trains are very similar sorts of problems and needs in terms of software.
And Jeffrey, when listening to Suzanne talking about the medical side of things and Veronica talking about movements in cities, is there anything you'd like to ask either one of those?
Yeah, I'd be interested in asking Suzanne, has digitalization impacted your the supply chain? And I'm sure these devices have thousands of different parts, and how maybe data sheets and specifications and all that impacts your supply chain and into the device itself.
One area that's which is quite interesting and potentially quite challenging is there was new requirements brought in both in the US and more recently in the EU about the unique device identifiers, which is the barcode effectively on the label of every device. Now, we would be very used to managing things like barcodes and scanning things in and out and having automated scanning systems, but the hospitals now have to basically scan these barcodes, and that becomes part of your patient file. And, it used to be that they used to take physical stickers or labels off and they'd stick them onto your paper patient file, whereas now we have this expectation that they're going to scan this information in and that information is uploaded to a cloud. So if there ever had to be some kind of a recall on devices, that it's very easy for a regulator who would have access to that cloud data to be able to see where all the affected devices are. So I think there's still some challenges, in terms of pulling that information in at the point of use. So where the device comes out of the box and just, making sure that if you open two devices, which sometimes happens if they come in different sizes and the clinician's not sure which one are they going to implant. So they could open the two devices, but then, making sure you only scan the one that you used so that information gets uploaded. And then for manufacturers, we now have all these unique numbers for devices that all have to get uploaded into databases, which is really proven quite challenging, creating these huge data sheets that then get uploaded into a centralized database and getting all the formatting correct and all of that stuff. So it's a real area of learning. But the intent is that you'd have one connected supply chain. So regardless of the system each manufacturer is using, ultimately the device ends up in this database, where basically the regulator is able to have visibility to where all devices have been used. So I think there's lots of opportunity there.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our podcast for today. My thanks to all of our guests: Jeffrey Roe from Telclic, Head of Engineering, Suzanne Roe Managing Director with Triskele Consulting, and Veronica Mariti Sesoko from Accenture The Dock. Of course, you'll find the website and LinkedIn details for all of them in our podcast show notes, which are in the description area of your podcast player right this moment. And for more episodes of our Engineers Journal Amplified podcast, do click the follow button on your player right now. And remember, full members get advance access to new episodes online at engineersireland.ie. Until next time, from myself, Dusty Rhodes, thank you for listening to our Engineers Journal Amplified podcast. Talk to you soon.